Welcome to Interfaith Conversations. I'm your host, Matthew McKnight. Here at Interfaith Conversations, we connect with each other's faith and beliefs. So as we begin this journey together, I wanted to share two stories with you real quick. So when I was 13 years old, I visited the National Cathedral in Washington, D.C. as part of my Boy Scout troop who was touring D.C. during the National Scout Jamboree. We came into the large cathedral and they escorted us right up into the choir seats way at the far end. And we were able to be there, a part of that service for a good hour or so, while they had singers and other parts of the service that were going on at the time. As a 13-year-old boy from the West, this was completely new to me, to be in a large, high-end church and to see these really beautiful services. It kept me alert and awake, even if some of my own fellow scouts struggled staying awake because it was the afternoon. But it was a neat experience. I had never been in that kind of place before. So being in that sacred sanctuary and service was a different experience for me than what I had grown up with in my own faith. And that kind of helped me stay alert, and I soaked a lot in. What was funny is that same evening, we went and attended a religious broadcast at my own church. We went to the Washington, D.C. temple. There's a meeting house right next to that for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And we all that were members of our faith in the troop attended this service. And while I was watching, I ended up not being able to stay awake because we had been out touring all day. And so I had not had the rest I had hoped. And I thought what was funny about it was that I fell asleep in my own service instead of the other service that I attended that day. As a 13-year-old, I kind of felt bad about that. But I remember that distinction between those two services from that experience as a 13-year-old scout. Now, let me tell you another story that took place less than 40 minutes drive from my last story, but many years later. I now was a 30-year-old young married person starting off my career in the DC area as a research analyst, and we had not been living in the area for long before I wanted to have a chance to visit one of the local mosques. I didn't know anyone that attended the local mosque, and since I didn't know how to contact anybody, I decided to just show up for the Jummah prayers one Friday afternoon that I was off of work. That's the day and time when many Muslims gather to have their specific sermons from their imams. So when I entered the mosque there, like all other mosques, there's a place where you take your shoes off and put them in shelves or on the floor so that the inner prayer area can stay clean. And when I went to take my shoes off, this elderly Muslim gentleman approached me. I noticed his gentle and kind disposition, and so I offered him a common Arabic greeting, Salam alaikum. He responded with a soft, gentle, old voice with the common reply of Wa alaikum salam. And then this man came and just gave me this wonderful embrace. I had never met him before, and this is the first time I had ever been in this building. He didn't know me. I was just a stranger coming into his mosque. And yet here this man embraced me as if I was one of his own kin. That day I felt a lot of peace for myself and a sense of even community being in that mosque that day. So why do I share these stories with you? Well, one main reason is to give you a glimpse into what interfaith interactions can be like. There's plenty of digital content out there in the cyber world that says that religions or different beliefs just don't mix. To speak to a person with another belief should be a contentious and hotly debated conversation about what is right. Well, in the case of this podcast and this channel, that's not our focus. On Interfaith Conversations, my goal is to help you learn more about other religions and spiritual perspectives so that you can better understand, respect, and value faith traditions beyond your own. Through this journey we take together, the hope is that you can also become more self-reflective about your own views of faith and belief. Here, I'll seek to build a respectful interfaith dialogue and also to help build religious literacy. With rising prejudice and violence against religious beliefs in the world today, each of us desperately need to learn more about the world's vast and diverse faith traditions and worldviews if we truly want to live together in this world. So with that understanding of the essence of our content in place, let me give you a little bit of background about myself. So I grew up in Utah. I was born here. And when I was 19 to 21 years old, I went, as many people do in my faith, to serve as a missionary. I served as a missionary for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in the beautiful country of Australia for 2 years, and had transformative experiences with other people, with serving others, and learning about other people's backgrounds. And so after that experience, I came home. I ended up going to Brigham Young University. And after that, I ended up eventually going to Jordan after I finished school, the country of Jordan, and had a wonderful time helping local NGOs in that country that was trying to help build what they needed to there. And that was an amazing experience. I loved spending that time in the Middle East, and kind of gives you a little highlight into myself as having some interactions with Islam in my lifetime. And so that's kind of where that early story came from, is that kind of relationship there. After that, I finished some more schooling and ended up going to Central New York to go to school at Syracuse University for 2 years. And then after going to Syracuse, I ended up during that time getting married to my wonderful spouse, and we were looking for work, ended up in DC, and that's part of that story that you heard before. So by profession, I am a research analyst. I was trained in community sociology, not even close to the subject necessarily that we're talking about today, other than the idea of community. How do you build community? And so I was in that for a few years. Academically, I helped publish papers in community sociology. And then I kind of switched over to more of the policy and program management side that led me to get my MPA from Syracuse, a master's in public administration. And so having that background, I'm technically by trade an applied program evaluator. I evaluate programs for a living. That's kind of what I do. But my life journey has taken me to all sorts of places in the world and across the United States. And I've interacted with so many different faiths and different areas. It's always been a fun interest of mine to learn about other religions and other beliefs. And so that's where I come into it from the interfaith conversation side, from my own personal journey that brought me to this point. But what I feel like has been lacking, which I talked about already before, is there's not a lot of content out there on the internet, in the social media space, where we just have conversations between each other of different faiths in a respectful manner, in a way that helps us understand the other and allows us to build something together in the sense of mutual respect and understanding. And so this channel and podcast is another way to strive to do that now that my family and I live back in Utah. And so I'm excited to kind of help bring some of that content to you and hopefully inspire yourself to be able to have these type of conversations more frequently on your own, so that this kind of interactions can be more prevalent in the world today, because we're so divided on so many other things. So I guess in some ways I kind of answered the ideas of why make a podcast about interfaith conversations, but let me give you a few more reasons why. In the United States today, there's just not a lot that unites us. There's a lot that divides us. Politically, religiously, socially, culturally, generationally. There's just so many things that don't keep us learning from each other and growing together. Instead, they try and put us in these specific categories that we have developed for ourselves, and then we never get out of them. And so I think it's really important to find ways to be open and to kind of get beyond that. Partly related to that same point, I also wanted to talk about the idea of we don't know enough about the other. And what I mean the other is this idea from social science that we have particular in-groups and out-groups in the world, in society. You know, me as a Latter-day Saint in the Church of Jesus Christ, we have our own in-group. People outside of us have, we would consider an out-group. Others would see us in the reverse, right? If you're an evangelical Christian, you would see, at least on paper, someone in my faith as an other, an out-group. But the point is how do you reach across the divide and learn about, quote unquote, the other, in a way that can be meaningful and also not disrespectful. It doesn't mean you have to end up totally agreeing with that other person, but it's the idea that you are being open enough to learn from that other person and for that person to learn from you. There's a Lutheran speaker that is called Martin Marty, and he had an interesting phrase to talk about on this point. He said, people who have strong convictions these days are not very civil, and people who are civil often don't have very strong convictions. What we need is convicted civility. This idea that you still retain what matters to you, but you're still civil in your relation to others. And so I hope as we go through this podcast, you get the message that you don't need to give up your own inner faith to have an interfaith conversation in a respectful manner. These conversations are where you learn new things, but at the same time, you learn and deepen your own faith. So learning about people external to you is something that we just don't do enough, I think, in the public discourse anymore. And it doesn't mean that you just have to put your religion aside or your beliefs aside. It means you bring them to the table and we have a dialogue that's respectful and we are able to talk to each other about it. Through that process, ironically, you end up changing a little bit of yourself. It doesn't mean you have to throw everything out, but you end up having new perspective. And so you can add that to what you already have a deep love for. And I think that's what's so great about this type of venue where we can do that kind of thing in this podcast and channel. So let me explain to you a little bit about different things we'll do on the podcast and channel here. The main meat that I think would be most relevant for lots of folks that they'll enjoy is we will be bringing on people from different faiths and perspectives. So we'll have another person come on and I'll have a dialogue with them about their faith. We'll talk a little bit about my faith and what does interfaith mean to us. And that will kind of give you as the viewer a chance to see different perspectives and learn for yourself. And in between those type of conversations I'll have with guests that will come on, I'll have time to also talk about elements from other faiths in relation to my own. And in general, I think it's also really good to just build religious literacy. Well, what's religious literacy? When someone's literate, they can read, right? Religious literacy is giving people the tools to understand religion. And it very often can be a religion that's not of your own, that you want to become more religiously literate about. So in the case that I shared at the beginning about Islam, I came to understand more literacy about Islam by interacting with people who practice that faith. And so I think it's also really important for us to understand better and be more religiously literate, just as a global people in general. Because when it comes down to it, we may know a lot of superficial things about another faith, but we may not know the depth. We may not really even know the nature of a faith. To be honest, we might have an idea or a caricature in our mind of what that faith really is and what it means to practice or believe in that faith, but we actually may not understand it completely. And in fact, you may come to learn that there's things about that faith that have a lot more in common with your faith than you realized. And that's what these type of conversations are for, is to have these type of interfaith conversations in a safe space without being divisive. So one of the last things I wanted to talk about is the symbol of interfaith conversations. I put together a while back when I was doing interfaith outreach, a symbol that tried to showcase this different interfaith dialogue and interaction that happens between different groups interacting together. You can see that at least the image is intended to evoke this fluid, dynamic interaction between these two different pieces, the different colors as they're shifting around one another. The text even can indicate this idea of traditional views as compared to modern views, or this idea of something that's intricate related to what seems more minimal. So you could even see it as this idea of something that has more passion, something that's more solemn. The heart, the mind, sun and water. So the symbol really was to try and evoke these same images in the viewer as what we're trying to do on the podcast and channel here, to showcase this idea that interfaith conversations are fluid and dynamic. These conversations are something that ebbs and flows, but also works really well together as a whole. Before we leave, I wanted to kind of highlight with you places where we will be rolling out the channel and the podcast too. So we'll be, of course, on YouTube, and we'll also be on Facebook. We have a Facebook page that you can go ahead and follow if you'd like. We also plan to have these type of content up on Instagram, Spotify, and also on Apple Podcasts. And so there's some great things and content I'm hoping to look forward to providing for you. Now, before we leave, I wish to leave you with kind of a phrase that came to mind as I was developing the podcast, which is this: whether you say shalom, salam, or namaste, you can be the change the world needs today.